Right. Morning once again. Welcome to another session. I think, as we discussed in our previous session, we're going to be focusing more on what's happening as far as your actual assessments are concerned. Like we said before, because you're redoing the module, obviously most content you should literally be familiar with. So it's just going to be a bit of touch and go in terms of certain sections. But naturally, main focus is going to be on the assessment. Make sure that we're all sorted as far as those particular platforms they are concerned. I will pop you a, YouTube link that you can access content from the other classes as well, so that it makes it a lot easier for you to get up to speed as far as module content there is concerned. You also discover that there is a revision sessions as well for previous test and exam papers. So I think that will do you a world of good to have a quick look at that as well, just to obviously get comfortable with the way this particular module is assessed, and naturally at the same time also understand how to answer and provide the relevant questions as far as that assessment goes. So, as we mentioned today, we want to quickly look at the assignments already been uploaded. Should there be any changes? I think campus will give you a heads up in terms of what's happening there. But I think for the time being, we'll go with what has been uploaded so that we know specifically what to take into consideration there. All right. So when it comes to assessment for the module, nothing has changed. You'll discover that we're going to be looking at, I think it's going to be 25% allocation for this assignment, then a 30% allocation for the test, and then 35% for the exam. And then naturally, remember, you've got that ICE component, your integrated curriculum engagement form that constitutes 10%. So obviously your overall is 100, and the pass mark is naturally 50% there. I think we've mentioned already the fact that should you not make the 50 and between 40 and 48, you qualify for a supplementary or a resubmission, depending. And then naturally that particular resubmission is going to be capped at 50%. Right. So I think that does that in terms of understanding what's happening there. So you're already familiar with the referencing processes. So we're not going to delve too much into detail on that one. I think it's important to understand that you reference accordingly and you use the Harvard referencing style. And when it comes to submission, I'm sure as it stands right now, you're going to be submitting through Safer Science, obviously on your VCLearn platform. Again, should that change, they'll give you a heads up. But I think the whole reason of you submitting through Safer Science is to check for plagiarism and obviously check for the content that has been used that is obviously not yours. And I think your maximum there is 25%. So I guess that you should be clear on what's happening there. It's important and literally imperative for you to ensure that when you submit your assessment, obviously through Safer Sign, you get the originality report, and that originality report obviously needs to be attached to your original submission. All right, so just ensure that your submission has an originality report attached to it. So you're not submitting just the originality report on its own. I think we had certain issues where a couple of candidates were submitting Safer Sign reports as the sole submission for the assessments. You need to ensure that the Safer Sign submission plus your distinctive assessment is incorporated as far as your submissions there concerned. All right, and again, 25% is your cap in terms of material that is not yours. But again, like I said before, just ensure that you reference accordingly, just to avoid any discrepancies there. So we're going to be looking at this paper. It's 100 marks, excuse me, naturally, and just delve into each one of the questions that are there, just to understand exactly what's happening. Excuse me, so that we know how to tackle these accordingly. All right, so let's go through it. 2 seconds. Yeah. All right, so you've got 4 distinctive questions that are there. And naturally, each particular question or section typically focuses on a specific learning unit as far as your environments they are concerned. If you look at question 1, that is naturally learning unit 1, it constitutes 15 marks. And then same difference applies for question number 2, rather. Still in learning unit number 1, but that constitutes 20 marks. And then if you look at question number 3, that's learning unit 2. Now you're looking at case components. That's a 40-mark question. So literally that's your make or break if you want to look at it from a different perspective. That if you obviously don't do really well in this particular question, it could detrimentally affect your overall mark. So it's important to take cognizance of that. And then lastly, the 4th question is learning unit number 3, working with your printers, and that's going to be 25 marks. So I think the advantage that you have as far as this particular assessment is concerned is that they've attached a rubric, and it also gives you focus on, or it highlights the focus really on what you're supposed to be concentrating on as far as answering these particular questions there is concerned. So I think that rubric is quite clear in terms of what the focus is on and what you need to literally incorporate to ensure that you get you try and maximize as far as mark allocations there is concerned. So the first question here is looking at the whole concept of the visible PC. All right, I think it's literally similar to the assessment that you were looking at in last year's setup. But I think it's important just to make sure that we're all on the same page there. Again, like I was mentioning a couple of moments ago, in terms of what you need to typically incorporate there. So you're required to literally look at definitions, 15 marks there. They've asked you that they've given you a bit of a scenario, and they've mentioned that your colleague, your friend, would like to understand exactly how a computer system works, and would also like to know exactly what's happening with safety tools for handling computer hardware. So what you want to do is literally basically in your own words is explain what a computer system is or how a computer system works, and then list the safety tools for handling computer hardware. So that's a 15-mark question. They've mentioned that in less than a page. So you're looking at least half a page or an actual well, literally 3/4 of a page, dependent on whichever way you look at it, to adequately explain exactly how a computer system works. And if you remember what we mentioned before, it's imperative for you to mention the computing process. Yeah. So you've got the computing process, and naturally, I think we've discussed this before. Like I said, like we mentioned rather in earlier sessions, where you're looking at your input process, naturally output. That was initially what your computing process was all about. But remember, with the advancements of techno and more or less revisions to that distinctive process, you now can discuss your storage as well as network. So your computer system will also need to connect to a network and naturally need to provide some semblance of storage that is there. So I think in your discussion of what a computer system is, you're literally looking at the whole concept of mentioning your computing process in detail. Again, like I said before, to ensure that you try and totalize on mark allocations. And then with the safety tools, if you look at the 9th edition of your prescribed textbook there, it's literally discussing what's happening as far as chapter number 2 is concerned, operational procedures. But if you're using the 10th edition, that's obviously going to be chapter number 1, which is safety and So you've got distinctive tools that obviously enable you to work accordingly as far as your computer hardware is concerned, to avoid those issues that we mentioned before, your electrostatic discharge, also looking at the whole concept of what is happening as far as EMI, RFI is concerned. So you're trying to literally just safeguard your computer systems from these, because we mentioned before that such issues like ESD can damage your computer systems in their entirety. So when you look at such components like your boards, your hard drives, in certain instances, RAM, even the expansion cards, these can be affected in a detrimental fashion when it comes to ESD. So what it literally means is that should ESD affect your systems, you would literally need to replace them in the entirety. So if you were looking at the board as an argument, you then need to ensure that you actually need to replace that board. Same difference would go with RAM, your CPUs, and hard drives as typical examples there. So you're concentrating specifically on chapter number 2 there, as far as your 9th edition is concerned, for the safety part of that question, and then chapter number 3 for the explanation of how the actual computer system works. Again, like I said before, just ensure that you reference accordingly. Again, try and avoid just plugging out content exactly as it is from textbooks or slides. That's the reason why they've highlighted or they've mentioned that in your own words there, because we need to show an understanding of what is happening as far as the actual concepts they are concerned. So I think that one is pretty a straightforward 15-mark question. Just make sure that you don't forget to mention the safety tools part after literally looking at the computing process in terms of explaining how a computer system works. I think that clarifies that particular part there. And then when you look at question number 2, that's a 20-mark question, and this one is at traits and operational procedures. So if you look at, like we were mentioning a couple of moments ago, if you look at chapter number 2 in your 9th edition, like I said before, the title of that chapter is operational procedures. Just looking at how you would you are expected to behave in the actual workspace from an ICT point of view, or as an ICT professional, and also how you expected to engage with your clients and your customers, as far as literally mimicking a professional outlook as far as your well-being there is literally concerned. If you're looking at the 10th edition, excuse me, on the other hand, that will be chapter number 1, which is safety and professionalism. So you're supposed to literally draw up a customer service strategy. So I think this also speaks to your help desk in terms of understanding exactly how you would engage with clientele accordingly. So it's a strategy that you can use. Remember, there's a host of templates that are out there for use. Again, ensure that you reference content accordingly. So if you download and use a template off the net, and ensure that you acknowledge sources accordingly there. So you've got a customer service strategy. Specifically for an IT company. So I think it's important to realize that it's not just a customer service strategy in its generic sense, but it has to be inclined to an IT company. So it's important that if you do end up using templates that are there, just ensure that you look for content, or you panel beat what you found to suit your IT company's environments there. All right, so just ensure that you mimic that part, and in a sense as well, ensure that it's appropriate and the right structure. So customer service strategy for an IT company, and they've mentioned there that you can use an application of your choice to literally create a document. So if you want to go with PowerPoint, that's all up to you. Just to make sure that you've incorporated content there accordingly. Excuse me. And then the same difference applies if you're going to be using Word or naturally converting that document into a PDF format. And then what you're literally supposed to be concentrating on is communication as part and parcel of that. So again, with the 20 mark allocation, just ensure that you add in as much relevant content as necessary. And remember, the other thing as well is that because it's an IT customer service strategy, you also want to create a document that is not, for lack of a better expression, boring. So ensure that you create an engaging document. You add in images or illustrations where distinctively necessary to more or less make it something that individuals might want to read. Remember, if it's just content that has a host or a bunch of words, it might not be, again, for lack of a better expression, attractive to read. So just ensure that you add in as much relevant content there to make sure that there is some engagement with the document. Make the document engaging by adding in those illustrations, and obviously they have to be relevant to the content that you plugged in, and they have to literally speak to the content that you've added in there. So for communication, that's what growth, professionalism, inappropriate behavior, and literally safety procedures. So remember, your things like safety procedures, these need to stick to the IT environment. Yes, there are generic safety procedures that are out there for obviously every other institution. Try and avoid the concept of just generalizing. Just make sure that what you're creating is an IT service strategy. So the safety procedures that we're discussing here need to be inclined to the IT environment as far as your distinctive contribution is concerned. Obviously, such content as your communication would literally be again, self-explanatory. How do you communicate on a professional platform? How do you ensure that that particular communication is assertive, is respectful, and obviously is literally engaging with the customer as far as your environment is concerned. And I think we've mentioned this before, that especially when you're looking at solving any distinctive issues, try and avoid using jargon. I think we normally fall into that trap where we tend to forget that it's not always that you're engaging with individuals that are within the ICT space. So you need to obviously make sure that when you conduct yourself with the written or verbal, that particular communication is in such a manner that your clients or your customers can understand exactly what's happening as far as your specific environment is concerned. Obviously, with professionalism, how to literally behave in the workspace, like we mentioned before. This also looks at your appearance, ensuring that the professional image that you're portraying, not just from a engagement point of view, but obviously your appearance and literally how you conduct yourself in front of your clients and customers. So typical examples of probably literally not answering a call mid-sentence, especially when you're looking at the customer, literally explaining or trying to give you a heads up in terms of what the issues they might have been experiencing is concerned, or when you are trying to literally explain something to them, call comes in, even if it's from your superiors or even if it's from work, it's important to ensure that you finish and then adequately excuse yourself should need be, or literally finish rather. Try and present a couple of quick fixes before you attend to that call. Inappropriate behavior as well, again within ICT generic space. So I think the point really here is, if it's a 20-mark question, as you can see, again, like we mentioned before, just add in as much relevant content as necessary, reference accordingly, and also, like I said before, make the document engaging. Please do not be in that category of just throwing in words there without actually making the document engaging. And again, like I was saying, engage in illustrations, make it something that people would want to read at least, or spend some time reading, just to understand exactly what the company's IT service strategy is all about. Remember, you need to create this document, so try and avoid just plugging in someone else's IT customer service strategy, because again, that would be plagiarism. You can get an idea of what one looks like, but obviously, as far as content is concerned, ensure that that content shows your understanding of what safety and professionalism is all about, shows your understanding of what is happening as far as operational procedures would go. All right, so that one is done and dusted. I think this question also is made simpler by the presentation of your rubric there. So it shows you where marks are going to be allocated, what you need to concentrate on. So just as an indication here, if you look at the first section there, your four mark allocation, it mentions that use of an application, and they've mentioned there in brackets, consider creativity. So your creative aspect there, you've got already a 4-mark allocation associated with that. So I think it makes it a bit clearer in terms of what you're taking into consideration. 4 marks in the entirety just for creativity, and then naturally 4 marks a piece for every other section that you've got incorporated there. All right. So it's important for you to make sure that at least you use the appropriate program, and you add in, again, like I mentioned before, some semblance of creativity there. All right. And then question number 3, the one we were mentioning earlier on now, to say that this is literally your make or break question. 40 marks there. We should have a practical session set aside for us, depending on availability of venues. I think this will also assist. Again, it's something that you did in last year, but it will assist in probably jogging your memory there, as well as providing the images that are literally relevant here. All right, so you'll need to get an actual physical system unit. It doesn't have to literally work, but I think in my case, I literally want to have something that that functions accordingly, so that at least when you dismantle this system unit, and then you put it back together again, it should work without any incident. That is also a practical session that teaches you exactly what's happening in terms of being able to handle these components and to know exactly where to plug in content and so on, as far as working with basic computing systems there is concerned. So what you're going to be looking at there is literally how to disassemble a system unit. And then once you've disassembled one, you obviously need to literally identify and name and function of each distinctive port that you'd find. There are 5 of them in total. So you've got your generic onboard ports, especially if you look at the motherboard section associated with content there. You've got onboard ports that are there. Identify any 5 of them, and then mention their distinctive function as far as your environments would go. And then again, identify the form factor of your boards. And remember, I'll also, like I said before, I'll give you a link to check that motherboard session that I undertook with the previous groups, which you literally see there that when it comes to boards, two main things are relevant, right? When it comes to your motherboards, you'd want to discuss the chipset and the form factor. So remember, your chipset is the one that provides an interface that allows the CPU to literally link up with all the other components that are plugged, all the other peripheral devices per se. Because previously, what was incorporated was were controllers rather that were plugged into the board that would act as an interface, where that interface obviously is a go-between naturally between your CPU and the actual device itself. So for the several devices that were there, when computer systems were created, you needed to have those controllers that would act as interfaces that would link the CPU to those hardware devices. But you can imagine how many controllers would need to be incorporated on today's motherboards. Should that same architecture have been or more or less if it wasn't upgraded or it wasn't literally changed, you'd have really big boards because there's a lot of devices that are out there. So what was typically designed was a chipset that would then allow a myriad or a whole host of devices to now connect through that particular chipset to your distinctive central processing unit. And initially, that chipset was subdivided into a north and a south bridge. And remember what we mentioned before, your north bridge was responsible for connecting your RAM as well as your graphics, literally the faster components associated with your machining mechanism. And then the south bridge would connect to the CPU through the north bridge, and it would normally connect your input-output ports. So your keyboards, your mice, your hard drives, and other peripheral components would connect literally through the south bridge. So if you to look at an earlier board, you'll normally find that your north bridge would literally be closer to your CPU and RAM, and then the south bridge would be closer to your input-output ports as far as your conventions would go. So initially, you'd find that the whole concept of the north bridge was, or what the function of the north bridge, that connectivity to RAM and graphics was. You'd literally mention the fact that it was absorbed into the central processing unit. So literally, you'll find now every CPU would look at integrated memory controllers. It would also literally look at integrated graphics. I think we mentioned before that proprietary architecture that was developed by AMD, which is an APU. And remember, an APU is short for Accelerated Processing Unit. And what it literally does is combine the CPU and the GPU into one distinctive chip. So the South Bridge now is the only part of the chipset that is literally relevant. If you want to look at it from a different point of view, your CPU now handles anything to do with the North Bridge. So your South Bridge, initially Intel would call their South Bridge ICH, or Input Output Controller Hub, and then your AMD would call it an FCH, which is short for Fusion Controller Hub. But now both institutions literally just coin your South Bridge as a platform controller hub, which is the one that still has that functionality of connecting your input-output ports. So when you discuss your boards, you've got that, your chipset. So that chipset, when it comes to your motherboards, again, defines the type of processor and the type of RAM that you can literally use as far as your components are concerned. So it literally enables you to identify compatible CPUs from both brands, from both your main brands, AMD or Intel, in terms of the socket, as well as you would say the maximum limit in terms of the actual CPU that you can plug in there. And then compatible RAM in terms of the type of RAM, as well as the whole concept of capacity. So type of RAM, is it a DDR3, DDR4, DDR5 RAM module? in terms of capacities. Is it a 16 gig stick as an argument? And then you can also even discuss the whole concept of things like your latencies and whatnot. But I think the most important thing is just looking at the type of RAM that you can plug in, and obviously the capacity there, depending on the actual board itself. So that's what's happening with the chipset. And then on the other hand, it's important to discuss the form factor. So you've got chipset defining a compatible CPU and RAM, and then you've got the form factor that then determines the shape and size of the actual motherboard itself, which will then also determine the shape and size of your system unit. So it's all dependent. ATX is your basic standard that you'll find. Your advanced technology extended. You also have such form factors like your ITX, micro AT, mini ITX. Also looking at other proprietary architectures that would develop your small form factor platforms, just for argument's sake. So the form factor is just the shape and size of your board, which determines obviously the shape and size of the actual machine that you'd literally use. So you'll need to use the system. You obviously take images of these components. Please avoid just plugging content off the net. You need to be taking your own images of the system unit that you would literally dismantle. If you want to use the one you've got at home, still works. But I think, like we said before, we should have a separate session for this that would enable us to ensure that you've got the appropriate content. So you need to obviously ensure that when you dismantle your machine, you take images accordingly, and then you appropriately identify what they've mentioned there. So you need to then identify, if you look at the third bullet point, identify the form factor of your motherboard. And then after that, then identify any 5 hardware components of the system unit. So these are components within. So literally what we're looking at here is you can discuss that same motherboard that we were talking about a couple of seconds ago. You can also look at your distinctive central processing unit as an example, your hard drive. You can also discuss your RAM as typical, or even the optical drive as well. So it's 5 of them that you need to identify. Remember, these are supposed to be within the actual system unit itself. So it won't do you any good for you to mention a monitor or any other peripherals, because we're looking at components within the system unit. So with computer case within your tower. Those are the components that we need to literally discuss. So then they've mentioned that after you've identified these, you provide a function of each one of them accordingly. Once you've identified a function, you state a common problem that is normally associated with that component. After stating that common problem that is normally associated with that component, you then need to obviously provide a distinctive solution. All right. So in essence, it's important to ensure that here you're literally looking at a troubleshoot process as well that states that, okay, look, this component does that, and then normal problems that are encountered by this distinctive component are these, and then naturally also then looking at ways and means of trying to distinctively fix those. What are the common fixes that you can find as far as these particular issues are concerned? And then ultimately, at the same time, after having mentioned all that in detail, you then need to look at how to assemble the actual unit itself. So you've broken it down, or literally rather you've taken it apart. I think that's the more appropriate term. After taking it apart, accordingly, we now need to make sure that you put it back together again. So you've got distinctive steps that you need to mention here. It's not just a question of just dismantling without a distinctive plan. There are steps that you obviously need to take into consideration. You need to mention these in detail again, ensure that you don't skip content or you don't summarize. You are as specific as necessary as far as dismantling or disassembling a distinctive unit, and you're also as concise as necessary when you're looking, or as precise as necessary rather, when you're looking at putting that particular unit back together again. So that's your 40 marks associated with this distinctive question. I think the main takeout is ensure that you don't use content that you're just plugging off the net. So for instance, for the images in terms of, or for the content in terms of your ports, as well as the form factor, as well as the actual components there. So bullet points, actually all bullet points, ensure that when you're taking the machine apart, you also provide images. Again, not off the net, but your own images that you've used with a campus issued system unit, or with your own system unit at home, depending. But I think the campus unit would be more appropriate. At least it makes it a lot simpler and a lot easier for you. I think so. One of the forthcoming sessions, we'll see if we can set aside something for usage there. And then, so that's your 40 marks. Again, with this particular question, you'll discover that they've also incorporated a rubric for you. So they'll show you exactly where marks are going to be allocated as far as distinctive content there is concerned. So again, a bit simpler as far as content would go. So typical example is when you identify a component, it's 1 mark for that function, common problem, and so 4 marks a piece for the 5 components. That will give you the 20 mark allocation there. But please ensure that you add in the relevant, as you are explaining or as you are incorporating content for your components, it's important and imperative for you to ensure that you literally include images there. So that's question number 3 done. And then the last one is to do with printing or printers. So here you're looking at comparing inkjet and laser printing components, specifically the actual printers themselves. So you've got a table that is there that is looking at considerations, that is also obviously looking at those considerations as a comparison between your inkjet printers and your laser printers. So it's important to understand environments that you're using these particular printing mechanisms in, also identifying what is happening as far as the whole concept of pricing, for instance. You can also discuss, just as a typical example, ease of troubleshooting, and so on and so on and so on. So these are the typical examples of what you literally need to consider when you are comparing the two, or when you're literally recommending any one of these printers to any individual there, or any institution per se. Like I said before, looking at things like pricing, looking at environments in which these particular printers can be used, capacities when it comes to printing, also looking at ease of troubleshooting, ease of replacement, or replacing components, or working with components, whichever way you want to look at it. So such components as your cartridges, as well as distinctively your toners, what's happening there in terms of comparisons and so on. So these are some of the things that you'd want to consider, and you've got mark allocations that have already been incorporated there. But remember, you also need to then select one and then briefly motivate why it's the best choice. So literally here, it's not. I think it's up to you in terms of what you actually provide for, depending on the scenario that you want to use as a distinctive example. That is inkjet, state exactly why an inkjet would be applicable and appropriate. if you want to go with a laser printer, same difference applies there. So just make sure that you don't end at just looking at comparisons between the two entities there, but just ensure that you also provide a recommendation at the end of the day for this particular individual that you are literally compiling this report or compiling this comparison list for. So I think that does that as far as this year is concerned. Make sure that you list your considerations accordingly there, and you plug in the actual content. So you've got mark allocations just for listing the considerations, mark allocations for stating how relevant or what these considerations would imply when you're looking at an inkjet, and what these considerations would imply when you're looking at a laser printed there. And that's a 25 mark question. Again, that's a lot of marks associated with your distinctive question there. Just ensure you plug in as much distinctive content as necessary there. Please avoid just submitting something that you submitted last year as well. That's also important for you to ensure that you submit a new appropriate document that is associated with this distinctive assessment there. All right. So that's the discussion that you've got associated with your assignment. I'm assuming that might not have any questions that are distinctively there, but should you end up discovering that you've got questions associated with the assessment, please pop me a mail, and then we can take it from there in terms of what's happening as far as your distinctive environment there is concerned. I think, like I said before, I will put through a link here that you can use to access pre-recorded sessions that will discuss such content as your boards, your firmwares, and so on, and also look at the, like we mentioned right at the beginning of the session, those past test and exam papers that will also assist in terms of preparation for assessment as far as actual module there is concerned. All right. Any questions, contributions here, or distinctive concerns? Questions, contributions, or concerns there? Right. So like I said before, pop me a mail should you have any distinctive issues as far as this particular content here is concerned. I'll also provide a link to this recorded session, so that should you need to go through it again, you can, and then should you have any questions, just pop me a mail, and then we can take it from there. All right. So if there are no questions, I think we are good to go. All right. Thanks for attending. Stay safe, keep smiling. We'll see you in the next session there. Cheers.